Hi there. This following analysis will explore the hypothesis of if the sustainability of the working conditions decreases, then the productivity of the labor will decrease as well. This will be examined through looking at natural resources, infrastructure, and mobility of labor and capital. Firstly, we can look at the natural resources available in each village. This is important because it makes up the physical inputs of their labor. Comparing the two villages, a main difference is the dispersion of land. The large plot of farmland of Xikang as opposed to the scattered and dispersed land, small plots of land in Beidou, shows that Beidou has suitable land pretty much everywhere throughout the village, whereas in Xikang only a very distinct spot is able to be used. Showing this on the 360 map, we can see a clear comparison between the two villages. So here this is a village in Xikang, and as you can see, these pictures show that the big plots of land are all quite exposed. So these pictures here are showing the farmlands and Xikang farmers working there. And essentially we can see that there aren't a lot of trees or shelter that are surrounding the big plots of farmland. And this makes the farming in Xikang much more susceptible to natural harms. Villagers must combat damages caused by weather. Person CEO of the Xikang village stated, if it's too windy or too wet, the harvest will get affected. So it depends on the weather. But when it's good weather, the harvest is good. When it's bad, you have to buy foods from outside. So also by clicking on the sound field I placed, you can hear that the wind is quite strong. However, in Beidou, the farmlands are smaller and surrounded by tall trees and bushes, as you can see in this picture here. So this is the exact spot. Essentially, this provides shelter from the sides, preventing crops from being damaged by strong winds, and provides a layer of protection from rainwater, erosion, flooding, and much more. You can see this clearly from these pictures as well. The farm in Xikang is big and doesn't have trees around, but the Beidou farm is small and has a lot of protection, trees, vegetation surrounding it. Therefore, by having the natural resources that protect against weather, Beidou has working conditions that make the environment more sustainable for villagers to have good harvest. Furthermore, the two villages differ in the terms of the natural resource of water. Xikang has no big bodies of water other than a water reservoir, yet Beidou has rivers, lakes, and ponds. We can see this on the 360 map. So this is an area of Beidou village. You can see there's quite a big, long river here. And looking at an actual map, you can also see that Beidou over here is situated much closer to the coast. So this is the ocean, and than the village of Xikang, which is up here, and this is the water reservoir. And this river that we can see is probably the river that we saw just now on the 360 map. And you can see that Xikang, other than water reservoir, doesn't have any forms of natural bodies of water. And Beidou has this river and also the ocean. And this is important because it creates a difference in the types of labor. As we can see, in Xikang, farming is the main form of labor. Several villagers, specifically person A, J, I, and H, have all said that they farm their own vegetables but buy all their meat outside the village. On the other hand, in Beidou, they'll farm their vegetables and also catch their seafood in nearby waters, which they can easily access, as you can see from this map. This was mentioned by person 1, 2, 3, and 8. Obviously, we can see that without access to water, there cannot be seafood. We also see that Beidou villagers grow rice, which is a crop known for needing incredible amounts of water. We can actually see the rice fields right here. And in these pictures, you can actually see the villagers, pictures that I took here, these were the villagers processing the rice with this machine here. Therefore, the bodies of water is a natural resource that ties into the input for their systems of labor, allowing the Beidou villagers to receive more outputs in the end. This is a great example of the geographic determinism theory. The physical build of the environment predisposes the villagers to certain types of work, as well as the trajectory of their growth and success. However, soil fertility is a concern, as it is a crucial input for the crops to grow successfully. Person A from Xikang has stated, if the soil isn't fertile enough, we can spread fertilizers. That's why the weather is a bigger problem for us. We can't control it. But in the long run, it will begin to affect the yield of the crop, because the pH levels in the soil will be too acidic or too basic from the fertilizers. From this statement, we can see that the current conditions of work are not sustainable in the long run, and the future of farming in Xikang may be at risk. However, in Beidou, person 2 has stated that their fertilizer is made of shrimp skin and shell. This form of fertilizer is organic, which will cause less damage to the soil content, as it is not all natural. Therefore, we can see that the natural resources in the village of Beidou has provided the farmers with a sustainable working process for fertilizing their soil. This aids in the increase of productivity. All in all, we can see that the working conditions are more sustainable in the village of Beidou, as they have an abundance of natural resources that are unique to the area, and are favorable to integrate as inputs in their circular systems of labor. The more beneficial inputs you put in the system, naturally the more useful outputs you can get. As a result, the productivity in Beidou is higher than Xikang. Secondly, infrastructure is a working condition which affects productivity. This is because in a circular diagram, infrastructure correlates with processes, as it provides tools that may be necessary to create output. Naturally, if the infrastructure is more suitable for the input and processes of the labor, the output will be better. Let's first look at the conditions of roads. This is significant due to how it affects the types of transportation available. Here's a tally that we can see of the types of transport between the two villages. As we can see, there are much bigger and modern vehicles in Beidou, namely cars and trucks. Furthermore, the general condition of the vehicles are better, and the total amount of the vehicles are greater. We can explore this further on the 360 map. As you can see, this is the road in Xikeng. With the pictures I placed here, you can see that the motorcycles that are being used are not in great condition. The same goes for most of the vehicles that Xikeng uses. As you can see here, they're mostly broken, not really in use. And also, if you look at the surroundings, you can see that the roads of Xikeng doesn't really allow for big cars or trucks to pass through, resulting in mainly motorbikes and other small transport mediums being used. Person B of Xikeng even said, vans aren't very suitable for surviving in the village because the roads aren't wide enough. On the other hand, Beidou, we can see, has much wider roads that allow cars and trucks in. So this is the road in Beidou. And you can see from these pictures that there is evidence of both cars and trucks in the villages on these roads that are quite well paved, and the vehicles are also in better condition. This is important because it connects to the built form. Since there isn't public transport in either village, the road structure affects who and what can reach the buildings of the village. We can see that the small roads of Xikeng makes the village look like a grid. So if I look up here, you can see that it's like a grid, where the buildings are in blocks and the cement roads cross-hatched next to the houses. The form of the Beidou village, however, as you can see, is a straight, pretty much a straight, long road with houses kind of built off either side. This makes the houses of Beidou much more accessible compared to Xikeng, as the doors are right on the side of the road. Plus, the large vehicles Beidou has can be used to transport large amount of goods and people straight to the doorsteps of families in the village. This is something that cannot be achieved with the small cross-hatching roads of Xikeng, which motorcycles can barely fit through. Being able to have adequate transportation increases the conditions of work for the villagers, as they can utilize vehicles to transport machinery, crops, tools, and more to make their processes efficient. This efficiency will help them achieve greater outputs in shorter time, thus improving productivity. Next, structures. Looking back at the Raomi, we can see that plots of land in Beidou are smaller and the plots of land in Xikeng are bigger. What we see here is that in the small individually owned plots of the farmers in Beidou, it allows the farmers to actually build these fences and walls that we see here. And looking at these pictures, we can see that that is actually a unique feature of Beidou. So you can see there are no fences or walls whatsoever on Xikeng, but there are these fences that they built themselves and this wall that protects and surrounds their farmland. This infrastructure can benefit the working conditions as it keeps pests such as rodents and other animals from eating all the crops. This is one of the greatest issues Xikeng farmers constantly try to combat. Person J states, the harvest wasn't good this year, as the rats ate all the peanuts. They dig up peanuts from the ground. Therefore, we can see that by keeping pests out, it helps the crops grow successfully to harvest. And with the infrastructure of these walls and fences, the working conditions of Beidou has improved, and thus their productivity has risen. The points raised above show that the infrastructure in Beidou is generally better than Xikeng, and that improves the working conditions which lead to greater productivity. However, Xikeng does have some areas of infrastructure that is more advanced than Beidou. This would be the water storage systems. As mentioned before, the village of Xikeng has a water reservoir nearby, and I can show you this on the 360 map, a location where you can see that's the water reservoir. It's built up sort of on a hill, and basically, if I click on this hotspot that I made, you can see that the water actually runs down. I have pictures that of the water runs out these water channels down to this waterway that sits right parallel to their farming fields. So you can see that this man here, a farmer, actually just got the water and will use that water to water his crops. And in this sense, the Xikeng's working condition of water supply would be more sustainable, as a water reservoir is a controlled, regulated storage space, whereas a pond or lake in Beidou is a part of nature that is meant to support wildlife and will constantly change in water levels, content, pH levels, and more. So this makes the water reservoir a more reliable and sustainable source for the crops. All in all, we can see that the infrastructure is generally more sustainable in the village of Beidou, as they have good programs and structures in place to aid in the processes section of their system of labor. The more beneficial and efficient processes you have, then naturally the more outputs you will get. As a result, the productivity in the village of Beidou is higher than Xikeng. Lastly, we can look at how natural resources and infrastructure tie together to affect a third working condition, mobility of capital and labor. This working condition correlates to the processes section of the system, but also touches upon feedback, because with more mobile capital and labor, the village can benefit from the increased supply of labor and capital, and that acts as feedback to go back into the system. In terms of labor mobility, we can see look at jobs other than farming and fishing. In Xikeng, one of the only alternative occupations we saw was a shop owner. However, the owner says people from this village don't really buy anything from the shop. People barely come. This means that the shop would have to rely on customers from the outside. Yet, from what we've established with the roads and transport, we see that it's difficult for large groups of people to access the shop, especially considering the absence of public transport. Therefore, without any consumer demand, the supply of products which the system outputs will not produce any feedback, making the economy a linear one. We can also see that the elderly villagers are unable to move away from farming due to the low labor mobility. The shop owner has stated, "I take care of my own crops and also run this shop," showing that switching to another job was unsuccessful and she still had to stick with the subsistence labor of farming. On the other hand, in Beidou, we saw construction workers hired to build this new hostel. This means that we can infer the possibility of visitors entering the Beidou village. The roads and transportation conditions, which I previously explained, certainly helps this case, as construction materials and visitors would need large vehicles in order to be transported. Furthermore, there was a cleaning worker who works at the beach, earning 2,100 RMB per month. The fact that the villagers of Beidou are able to work in other jobs shows that the labor is currently more mobile than Xikeng. Labor mobility is important in increasing the productivity in the villages, as they must move from their current subsistence for labor into commercial forms to increase capital and productivity. More importantly, labor mobility gives farmers a chance to change their occupation. This is important because many villages in Xikeng have actually stated their dislike towards farming. Person E states, "Farmers are poor. Of course I would want my children to go get an education and earn money instead." Yet in Beidou, person 3 states, "I like to go fishing. When I was young, I went to different places in the world to fish, like the Philippines, Nansha." With this, we can see that having a positive feedback mechanism is important, as it creates the incentive to actually continue to maintain the productivity. Furthermore, with the failing business of the shop in Xikeng, the supply of labor can only decrease, because no workers would want to enter this economy, meaning the sustainability is low. However, once the hostel in Beidou is built, the supply of labor instantly increases, as they would need to bring in new workers to run the hostel, thus sustaining and booming the economy. Let's move on now to capital mobility. We have already established that the roads, transport, and built form of Xikeng isn't as favorable because it means that Xikeng is more secluded, making the supply of business and amount of trading between communities extremely low, and this is evidenced by the example of the shop. However, in Beidou, we saw a van that sold products. This van can only enter Beidou due to the conditions of the roads, and this opens business up between communities, which is a huge growth factor for the economy and their productivity. So overall, the concepts of labor and capital mobility tie in with points about infrastructure and natural resources, forming a better understanding of the linear relationship between sustainability of working conditions and productivity. And synthesizing all this understanding, we can look at a specific case of how the circulatory system works. I'll be using the village of Xikeng and taking their main form of labor. I will be going, which is farming. I will be going through how a farmer would plant and harvest peanuts. Firstly, we can look at the inputs of the system. Physical inputs would include seeds, water, weather, precipitation, soil, fertilizer, and sunlight. Human inputs includes time, energy, and the farmers themselves. As we can see, the physical inputs stated here are all points that I have talked about in regards to natural resources. We know that in Xikeng, aspects regarding the soil and fertilizer, weather, etc., are all unsustainable, as I explained before. Next, these inputs go into processes. The processes involved with the peanuts are sowing, planting, watering, weed removal, spreading fertilizers, and then harvesting, washing, drying under the sun, and then dehulling the peanuts. As we can see, the processes are closely tied to the points I have made about infrastructure. We know that the watering aspect of Xikeng is quite sustainable due to the infrastructure of the water reservoir. However, we also know that the process of spreading fertilizer is unsustainable due to how it affects the soil's pH levels. Third, the outputs, which is essentially the productivity of their labor. After the processes, what we get are the peanuts, leftover soil, the shells, and the stalks. These items go into feedback, and that can either be sustainable or an unsustainable result. So in the feedback, the peanuts are consumed, which can be seen as energy that goes back into the input when farmers go to work and grow more crops. Farmers have also stated that they use their peanuts to make their own peanut oil. This can be seen as another system that would stem from this one that could be sustainable. The unsustainable aspect of this would be the leftover soil, which, as established, would be affected by the fertilizer and not work out in the long run. The sustainable aspect would be the shells and the stalks. The shells are used for mulching, as seen in this picture here, taken from Xikeng. Mulching helps retain soil moisture and reduce weed growth. The stalks, as you can see here on Xikeng, are burned into ash and they serve as fertilizer, which is another system that stems from this one. As these two outputs, regarded as trash, is actually repurposed and re-enters the system, we see sustainability and also complexity of how one system leads to another. So this diagram is very useful in proving the hypothesis. We see how natural resources and the infrastructure, which make up the working conditions of the village, serve as the inputs and processes section of the system, directly affecting outputs, otherwise known as the productivity. Therefore, as the sustainability of the working conditions decreases, the system shrinks, and the outputs or the productivity is lower. This is exactly what the hypothesis states. With lower productivity, the mobility of capital and labor is subsequently lowered as well, not to mention the amount of products we get, creating lower feedback into the system and a vicious cycle that only continues to bring down the working conditions and productivity. So all in all, we've proven the hypothesis. This now gives us a better understanding of how well-being can be affected by changes in systems and sustainability. Thank you.